In the northeastern corner of Nigeria's Borno state, where Boko Haram has massacred over 35,000 people since 2009, where entire villages have been erased from maps, where Christian communities have been hunted like animals in the dark, I was told God had abandoned us. I believed it, until the night He sent a lion. I want you to see what I saw. Close your eyes for 1 second. Actually close them. Imagine this. It is 2:17 in the morning. The air smells like burning thatch and diesel smoke. Your village, the one where your mother was born, where your grandmother ground millet every sunrise, where your children took their first steps, is on fire behind you. Orange. Roaring. Gone. The heat kisses the back of your neck as you run, and you don't look back because you know what you'll see. 12 men are behind you. Whoa. I counted them when they came through the gate. I counted the guns. I counted the torches. I counted the faces, young faces, some of them. Boys who should have been in school. Boys whose eyes had been emptied out, replaced with something cold and mechanical and hungry. Their commander, they called him Hassan Dogo, Hassan the Tall. He walked in front of them with a machete hanging loose from his right hand, swinging it like a man who had done this so many times the weight no longer bothered him. He pointed at my door. He said, and I heard every word because the night was that still, "Bring the Christian woman out. The one who's been preaching. Make an example." They had a list. My name was at the top. So I ran, barefoot, into the bush, into the dark Borno night where the thorns tore at my legs and the red laterite dust caked in my mouth and I couldn't tell which direction was north, which was death, which was any kind of mercy at all. I ran until my lungs were screaming. I ran until the gunfire got close, crack, 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 and a bullet split the air 3 inches from my right ear. I felt it. That hot, invisible finger. That whisper that says, "Next time." I fell. I hit the ground hard, face first into the dirt, and I lay there, gasping, listening to 12 pairs of boots crashing through the bush behind me. Getting closer. Closer. And in that moment, bleeding, terrified, completely alone, I did the only thing I had left. I whispered a name. Jesus. One word. Broken. Desperate. Barely even a prayer. And somewhere out in that darkness, something moved. Something enormous. Something that made Hassan Dogo's 12 armed men stop walking. I didn't know it yet. I was face down in the dirt, eyes shut, waiting to die. But God? God had just arrived. And He didn't come quietly. If you think miracles are ancient history, locked inside a Bible, sealed behind 2,000 years of dust, I need you to stay with me. Because what happened next was witnessed by survivors, by a UN field coordinator, and by the 3 militants who lived long enough to run screaming into the night, dropping their weapons never to return. This happened in 2023. This happened to me. And I'm alive to tell you every single detail. You need to understand something about Borno State before you can understand Hassan Dogo. This is not a place that appears on tourist maps. This is not a place where journalists linger after dark. This is the epicenter, the bleeding heart, of one of the most brutal insurgencies on the African continent. Boko Haram, whose name roughly translates to Western education is forbidden, did not simply fight a war here. They performed a transformation. They took a land of farmers, fishermen, mothers, grandmothers, children running barefoot between mud brick compounds, and they rewrote it. Village by village. Machete by machete. Mass grave by mass grave. By the time Hassan Dogo came to our village, over 2 million people had been displaced from this region. 2 million. That's not a statistic. That's every face you've ever loved, multiplied until the number stops meaning anything. Our village, I won't say its name because people I love still live nearby. And I will not make them targets, sat about 40 kilometers from Maiduguri. Small. Maybe 300 people at its peak. Mostly Kanuri and Shua Arab families, a mixture of Muslim and Christian households that had, for generations, lived in what I can only call cautious peace. We shared wells. We shared harvest festivals. My Muslim neighbor Fatima brought food to my mother's doorstep every Eid without fail. That world ended the year Hassan Dogo received his orders. I first heard his name 6 weeks before the night he came for me. A boy came running from the market, breathless, eyes wide, the kind of wide that doesn't come from excitement but from witnessing something your mind doesn't know how to process yet. He said a new commander had taken over the cell operating in our district. He said this man had come from the northeast. He said people in the last 3 villages called him Alsef, the sword, because of what he liked to use and because of how efficiently he used it. I didn't sleep that night. Within 2 weeks we started hearing the stories. They reached us the way all terrible news reaches small villages, in fragments, whispered at water points, traded in lowered voices at the market while eyes scanned the perimeter. A church in Gwoza, burned to the foundation, the congregation locked inside. A pastor in a village south of ours, taken, crucified on a wooden door in the town square as a message. His wife forced to watch. His children taken. I heard these things and my hands shook and I prayed and the prayers felt like they were hitting a ceiling and falling back on me. But I kept going. Because what else do you do? I was running an underground house church by then. 12 of us. Sometimes 15. We met in the back room of my cousin Emmanuel's compound, behind the storage area where he kept sacks of sorghum and dried peppers. We pushed the sacks against the wall, spread a mat on the floor and we worshipped. Quietly. No instruments, we couldn't risk the sound. Just voices, barely above a whisper, singing hymns we'd memorized because we couldn't risk carrying printed pages. I led the Bible teaching. That was my crime. That was why my name was on the list. I found out how it got there 3 days before the attack. A young man, I'll call him Yusuf because that is not his real name, came to my door just before sunset. He was 17. Nervous. Sweating in a way that had nothing to do with the heat. He had grown up 3 compounds away from me and I had known him since he was a child who used to steal mangoes from my uncle's tree. He would not meet my eyes. Sister Amara, he said, that is the name I use for this testimony, you need to leave. Tonight if you can. I asked him why. He swallowed. Long pause. And then very quietly, Hassan Dogo had a meeting last night. He had a map. He circled our village. He said the Christian woman who preaches must be made an example before the rains come. He said it sends the right message to the other villages. I felt the ground shift under my feet. How many men? I heard myself ask. I don't know why that was my first question. Yusuf finally looked at me. 12. He's sending 12. He says it's more than enough for one woman. He left quickly without looking back. I stood in my doorway and watched the last orange light die behind the acacia trees on the horizon and I thought about my mother, buried in this ground. I thought about the women in my house church. Their faces during worship, that particular softness that comes when the Spirit moves and you forget for 30 minutes that you are living in a war zone. I thought about running. I thought about staying. I spent 3 days paralyzed between the two. On the 3rd day Hassan Dogo made the decision for me. I was coming back from the well, clay pot balanced on my head, the same walk I had made 1,000 times, when I saw him for the first time. He was standing in the middle of the main road, maybe 60 meters away. Talking to 2 of his men. Tall. Unnervingly tall, the nickname Hassan Dogo was earned. 6'4" at least, lean and angular, dressed in mismatched military fatigues with a red armband on his left bicep. He had a beard trimmed to a severe point. His machete hung from a leather cord at his hip, and even from 60 meters I could see it had been recently cleaned. Too recently cleaned, that particular gleam that means something unspeakable was removed from it not long ago. One of his men pointed in my direction. Hassan Dogo turned. His eyes found mine across that 60 meters of red dust road and I felt it, physically felt it, like a cold hand pressed flat against my sternum. He didn't threaten. He didn't gesture. He just looked at me the way a man looks at something he has already decided belongs to him. Then he smiled. Slow. Deliberate. Patient. The smile of a man who has never not gotten what he came for. He said something to his men. They laughed. Talking to 2 of his men. Tall. Unnervingly tall, the nickname Hassan Dogo was earned. 6'4" at least, lean and angular, dressed in mismatched military fatigues with a red armband on his left bicep. He had a beard trimmed to a severe point. His machete hung from a leather cord at his hip, and even from 60 meters I could see it had been recently cleaned. Too recently cleaned, that particular gleam that means something unspeakable was removed from it not long ago. One of his men pointed in my direction. Hassan Dogo turned. His eyes found mine across that 60 meters of red dust road and I felt it, physically felt it, like a cold hand pressed flat against my sternum. He didn't threaten. He didn't gesture. He just looked at me the way a man looks at something he has already decided belongs to him. Then he smiled. Slow. Deliberate. Patient. The smile of a man who has never not gotten what he came for. He said something to his men. They laughed. I walked home. I did not run. Running would have told him something. But I set down the water pot, I went to the back room, I fell to my knees on that sorghum-smelling mat, and I prayed with everything I had. God, please. I'm not ready to die. My people need me. These women need someone. Please, show me what to do. Silence. The ceiling again. That terrible hollow silence. That night I packed one bag. My Bible, A battered Hausa-language New Testament with a cracked spine and pages I had read so many times the edges had gone soft as cloth. A change of clothes. My mother's photograph. And I waited. 3 nights later they came. I told you about the fire. The boots. The bullet that kissed my ear in the dark. What I haven't told you yet is what I was thinking in those seconds before I hit the ground. I wasn't thinking about survival. I was thinking about something the missionary, Sister Grace, God rest her, told me 6 months before Boko Haram took her from us. She held my hands, looked me straight in the eyes, and she said, Amara, the day comes when every human option closes. When it comes, and it will come, don't waste a single second on despair. Call on Jesus. Just his name. He doesn't need a long prayer. He just needs to hear you choose him. Lying face down in that Borno dirt, Hassan Dogo's men closing in, I finally understood what she meant. I had nothing left. I chose him. I want to tell you what a refugee camp smells like. Because nobody ever tells you that part. They show you the photographs, the neat rows of white UNHCR tents, the aid workers in bright vests, the children with large eyes staring into cameras. The photographs are real. But photographs don't carry smell. And the smell is what stays with you. Long after the gunfire fades from memory, long after the faces of the men who burned your village blur at the edges, the smell remains. It smells like bodies that haven't been washed in 3 weeks. It smells like the particular sourness of fierce sweat baked into clothing by a Sahel sun that shows no mercy. It smells like open latrines dug too shallow because the ground is too hard and there are too many people and nobody has enough time. It smells like cooking fires. Made from whatever wood can be scavenged, green wood, garbage wood, wood that produces more smoke than heat. It smells like powdered milk and boiled sorghum and the flat, metallic smell of water that has sat too long in plastic jerrycans under the sun. And underneath all of it, underneath everything, it smells like despair. I know that sounds impossible. Despair doesn't have a smell. But I promise you, when 10,000 broken people are packed into a space designed for 3,000, when every single person around you has lost something they cannot get back, when the collective grief of an entire region is compressed into rows of canvas and plastic sheeting, you can smell it. It seeps into your clothes. It follows you into sleep. I arrived at the Maiduguri IDP camp on a Thursday morning in the dry season, barefoot, with 1 bag and a story I was too exhausted to tell. A woman from the registration desk put a plastic bracelet on my wrist with a number on it. I was no longer Amara. I was a number. The first week I told myself it was temporary. This is what survivors do. We construct small dignities out of denial. This is temporary. I will go back. The village will be rebuilt. God will restore. I repeated these things to myself the way I used to recite Quran verses in the pre-dawn dark of my childhood. Rhythmically, mechanically, with the desperate hope that repetition would transform words into reality. I still prayed 5 times a day then. I performed wudu, the ritual washing, with the small amount of water my daily ration allowed. I faced northeast toward Mecca. I pressed my forehead to the ground. I recited Al-Fatiha with my lips moving in the dust of the camp floor. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Most gracious, most merciful. I said those words 170 times in that camp. I counted. Because counting gave me something to hold on to when everything else was disintegrating. And every single time, every single one of those 170 times, the sky above me was brass. Close. Silent. Empty. I don't say this to dishonor Islam. I say this because it is the truth of what I experienced. I say this because if you have ever prayed until your knees bled and heard nothing back, I need you to know that I understand that silence. I lived inside it for 4 months. It is the loneliest place in the universe. Lonelier than the bush at night. Lonelier than running from 12 armed men. Because at least when you are running, you are moving. In that silence you are simply suspended. Waiting for an answer that doesn't come. And meanwhile, the camp kept delivering its horrors with mechanical regularity. I watched a mother bury her son on my 6th day there. He was 4 years old. He died from a diarrheal infection, something that in any functioning city with any functioning hospital would have been treated with basic oral rehydration salts and 48 hours of rest. Here, it killed him in 3 days because the medical tent was overwhelmed and the supply truck had been delayed, and sometimes the gap between treatable and fatal is nothing more than geography and bad luck. His name was Musa. His mother, I never learned her name, I only knew her by the yellow wrapper she always wore tied around her waist. She dug the grave herself because there was no one left to help her. I watched her work for 2 hours in the hard laterite ground with a short-handled hoe, sweating through her wrapper, not crying. Past crying. That hollow, mechanical place that lies on the other side of grief's limit. I wanted to help her. I walked over and put my hand on her arm. She looked at me. Her eyes were like 2 rooms with all the furniture removed. She said, very quietly, very calmly, "Where is God? Tell me where he is, because I have been calling him for 3 months and he has not come." I had no answer. I went back to my tent and I sat on my mat and I stared at the canvas wall and I thought, maybe she's right. Maybe there is no one listening. Maybe prayer is just sound and sound just disperses into air, and the air doesn't care and that's all there is. That night was the closest I came to letting go of faith entirely. Not just in Allah. In anything. By the 2nd month, the camp had changed me in ways I didn't immediately recognize. I stopped performing all 5 daily prayers. Then 3. Then 1, just far, the pre-dawn prayer, out of habit more than conviction. Something in me was still reaching, still refusing to fully release the rope, even as my grip weakened finger by finger. I watched people around me and I cataloged their coping mechanisms the way a field researcher might, because cataloging kept my mind from turning fully inward where it was dangerous. Some people prayed louder and more desperately, as if volume could breach the brass sky. Some people stopped eating. Some people found corners of the camp where men sold locally brewed alcohol in plastic bags and they disappeared into that instead. Some people simply sat, hour after hour, day after day, staring at nothing, processing nothing, just waiting for their bodies to catch up with the decision their minds had already made. And some people, a small, stubborn, inexplicable few, seemed to have something I didn't have. A group of them met in the northeast corner of the camp, near the water distribution point, every evening just before sunset. They sat in a loose circle, maybe 8 or 10 people, and they sang. Not loudly. Not performatively. Quietly, the way you hum to yourself when you're alone and something inside you needs to make sound. And their faces while they sang, I cannot fully describe what I saw in those faces. It wasn't happiness exactly. It wasn't the absence of pain. It was something more like rootedness. Like trees that have been bent nearly horizontal by a storm but whose roots are so deep that bending is all the storm can accomplish. I watched them from a distance for 3 weeks before I got close enough to hear the words. They were singing about Jesus. Yesu yamuta dominan, Jesus died for me. In Hausa. Soft and unhurried, like they were singing to someone sitting right there in the circle with them. I told myself I wasn't interested. I walked away. I came back the next evening. And the evening after that. It was the 3rd week of watching them that Sister Grace found me. I say found me deliberately because she was the kind of woman who found people, who had a particular radar for the one standing just outside the light, arms crossed, pretending not to need what they were clearly desperate for. She was a Catholic missionary from Maiduguri, 50-something, with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses perpetually pushed up on her forehead and a laugh that seemed cosmically inappropriate for a refugee camp and yet somehow exactly right. She had been working in the Northeast for 11 years. She had been evacuated twice and returned twice, which tells you everything you need to know about her. She sat down next to me one evening without asking permission, in the particular way that certain women of a certain faith and age simply sit, as if the concept of requiring permission never occurred to them. "You've been watching us," she said. Not accusatory. Simply observational. "I was just sitting here," I said. She smiled. She knew. We sat in silence for a few minutes. Then she said, "What are you asking for when you pray?" I thought about it. To go home. To have my village back. To understand why. She nodded slowly. And nothing comes. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that I have thought about every single day since. "Maybe the silence isn't emptiness, Amara. Maybe the silence is the moment just before he speaks. And maybe he's waiting for you to ask the right person." I didn't respond. But that night, for the first time in months, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear. From possibility. 3 weeks after that conversation, Boko Haram attacked a supply convoy 2 kilometers from the camp. 6 aid workers. 2 killed. 4 escaped. The camp went into lockdown, no movement in or out for 72 hours. Tents packed tighter with new arrivals. Rations cut by a third. The smell got worse. The crying got louder. And Sister Grace, in the chaos of the lockdown, disappeared. I heard 2 days later from a woman who had been with her. A splinter group had taken her during the convoy attack. They wanted information about underground church networks in the region. She never gave it. They killed her. I sat with that for a long time. A woman who had given 11 years of her life to the most dangerous corner of Nigeria. A woman whose faith was so alive it practically generated heat. Gone. Just like that. taken by the same darkness that had taken my village, my community, my sense of a God who sees. I held my knees to my chest on that mat and I let myself feel it, all of it, the grief and the fury and the confusion. I let it move through me like a flood, and when it passed, I was empty. Completely empty. And in that emptiness, I remembered the last thing she ever said to me. 3 days before the convoy attack, she had held both my hands in both of hers, warm, dry, unhurried hands. And she had looked at me with those eyes that always seemed to be seeing something slightly beyond what was physically in front of her. "Amara," she said, "the day comes when every human option closes. When it comes, and it will come, don't waste a single second on despair. Call on Jesus. Just his name. He doesn't need a long prayer. He just needs to hear you choose him." She squeezed my hands. "When you have absolutely nowhere else to turn, turn up." 2 weeks later, the camp erupted into violence again. And I finally ran out of human options. I was walking back from the water point late afternoon, when I heard the shouting from the eastern perimeter. A group of men, some from a rival militia, some from inside the camp, the details were never fully clear, had entered through a gap in the fence. Gunfire. Running. Screaming. The particular chaos that a refugee camp becomes when the one thing standing between you and the violence outside dissolves. I ran. Not toward shelter. There was no shelter. I ran toward the edge of the camp, toward the bush line, toward the only direction that had no men with guns in it. Into the dark. Again. Just like the night Hassan Dogo came. Except this time I was further from any road, further from any town, further from any human help. And this time I didn't wait until I hit the ground. This time, running, gasping, thorns tearing my feet, I lifted my face to the black Borno sky and I said it, out loud in the dark with everything I had left. "Jesus, Sister Grace said you answer. She died believing it. I have nothing. I am nothing. If you are real, if you are who she said you are, I need you to prove it. Not tomorrow. Now." I ran 3 more steps. And then I stopped. Because something was in the bush ahead of me. Something that was breathing. I froze. Every survival instinct I had, and after months in a war zone, those instincts had been sharpened to something almost animal. Every single one of them screamed the same message simultaneously: do not move. Do not breathe. Do not make a sound. The bush ahead of me was maybe 15 meters away. Dense acacia scrub, the kind that grows in thick, tangled walls along the edges of the Borno savanna, branches laced with thorns the length of my finger. Moonlight barely penetrated it. Just enough to see shapes. Shadows within shadows. And something in there was large. I could hear its breathing, slow, rhythmic, impossibly deep for anything small. The kind of breathing that has weight to it. The kind that you feel in your chest before you fully process it with your ears. I stood completely still. Behind me, maybe 400 meters back, I could still hear the chaos of the camp. Shouting, a single gunshot, the wailing of children. In front of me, 15 meters of open ground, and then that breathing. I had nowhere to go. And then, very slowly, so slowly it was almost gentle, the breathing moved. Not toward me. Not away. It moved to the left. Parallel to me. As if whatever was in there was not deciding whether to attack, but simply adjusting its position. I don't know how long I stood there. Time does something strange in moments of absolute terror. It becomes elastic, stretching and compressing in ways that have nothing to do with clocks. It could have been 30 seconds. Could have been 3 minutes. Then the breathing settled. And the bush went still. And I became aware very slowly of something else. The air around me had changed. I need to try to describe this, and I need you to understand that I am not a poetic person by nature. I am a practical woman. A farmer's daughter. I describe things in plain terms. So when I tell you that the air changed, I am not speaking metaphorically. I am telling you that the physical atmosphere around my body underwent a measurable, undeniable shift. The temperature dropped, not uncomfortably, not with the sharp bite of a harmattan wind, but gently. Like someone had placed a cool cloth on the back of a feverish neck. The kind of coolness that feels like relief rather than cold. And with it came something I can only describe as weight without heaviness. Like the air itself became denser, richer, as if more was present in it than oxygen and dust. Like the atmosphere was suddenly inhabited in a way it had not been a moment before. I had felt fear every day for 6 months. This was not fear. This was the complete opposite of fear. This was, and I choose this word carefully, having turned it over in my mind for 2 years since, this was recognition. The feeling of recognizing something you have never encountered before but somehow always known. The way a newborn turns toward its mother's voice before it can see her face. Something was present. And I knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic entirely and landed somewhere deeper, somewhere in the very center of me. I knew that whatever was present had been drawn by the name I had just spoken into the Borno night. Jesus. I sank to my knees. Not dramatically. Not with any decision behind it. My legs simply gave way the way legs do when the body recognizes that kneeling is the only appropriate response to what is happening. The red laterite dust pressed into my knees. The thorns had cut my feet and I could feel the wet warmth of blood against the ground. I was trembling, not with cold, not with fear, but with something that felt almost like the physical sensation of a dam breaking. 6 months of compressed grief and unanswered prayer and crushing silence, and suddenly there was somewhere for it to go. And I talked. Not prayed exactly. Not in any formal sense. I didn't know how to pray to Jesus. I had been Muslim since birth. I had never once directed a prayer anywhere except Allah, and every nerve in my religious formation was telling me that what I was doing was haram, forbidden, dangerous, the kind of spiritual transgression that cannot be undone. But Sister Grace's voice was louder than my fear. He just needs to hear you choose him. So I chose. I talked. Out loud. In Hausa, then in broken Arabic when the Hausa words weren't enough, then in plain raw sound when language ran out entirely. I said, Jesus, I don't know who you are. I know what I was taught, that you were a prophet, that you did not die on the cross, that calling on you is shirk, association with partners beside God. I know all of that. And tonight I don't care. Because the God I have been calling for 6 months has not answered. And Sister Grace called on you every day of her life, and she had something in her eyes that I have never seen in the eyes of anyone who prays 5 times a day in this camp, including myself. I stopped. Breathe. She died for you. So you must be real. You must be worth dying for. And I need you to be worth living for too, because I am running out of reasons. The air tightened around me. That warm, weighted presence intensified. Not threateningly, not overwhelmingly, but the way sunlight intensifies when a cloud moves away from it. Gradual. Inevitable. I pressed my forehead to the ground, the same posture of sujud I had performed in prayer 1,000 times, but directed somewhere completely new, toward someone I was only just beginning to believe was there. And I whispered, if you can hear me, if you are real and you are here right now in this bush in this broken place, then please, don't let me die tonight. Not because I deserve to live, but because I want to know you. I want to know if what Grace knew is true. Give me time to find out. Silence. 5 seconds. 10. And then, from somewhere that was simultaneously outside me and inside me, from somewhere that had no physical location and yet felt more physically real than the dirt under my knees, I heard something. Not a voice exactly. Not audible in the way the camp sounds behind me were audible. But not imagined either. Something in between. Something that landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples outward to my extremities. One word. Daughter. I cannot make you believe what I am about to tell you. I understand that. I am a woman from a refugee camp in Borno State with a plastic bracelet and a number and no credentials and no proof except my own living body and the testimonies of people who saw what happened in the days that followed. But I need you to understand what that one word did to me. I had been a number for 4 months. Before that, I had been a target, a name on a list, a problem to be eliminated, a Kafir woman who needed to be made an example. Before that, I had been a widow, my husband taken by Boko Haram 2 years prior, my identity reduced overnight to the woman whose husband is gone. In 6 months, not one person had spoken to me with ownership, with belonging, with the specific tenderness of a parent claiming a child. Daughter. One word, and I came completely undone. I wept in a way I had not wept since the night they took my husband. Not the tight, controlled weeping of a woman who cannot afford to be seen breaking, but the deep, total, convulsive weeping of someone who has finally found a safe enough place to fall apart completely. The kind of crying that sounds almost like laughing at the edges because the relief is so enormous that the body doesn't know which release valve to open. I cried until I was empty. And when I was empty, when every last drop of 6 months of accumulated devastation had been expelled, I felt something I had not felt since before any of this began. I felt clean. Not physically. I was covered in dust and blood and camp grime. But internally, in that place that no shower can reach, I felt clean. Rinsed. No. I stayed on my knees for a long time after that. The breathing in the bush was still there. Slow and steady and somehow, I know how this sounds, somehow protective. Like a sentinel. Like something that had positioned itself between me and the camp chaos with quiet, unhurried deliberateness. Eventually the shouting from the camp faded. The gunfire stopped. I stood up. I walked back. And I was different. I couldn't have explained it then, I can barely explain it now, but something fundamental had shifted. Not the circumstances. The circumstances were identical. I was still in a camp. Hassan Dogo was still somewhere out there. I still had nothing and no one. But I was different. 3 days after that night in the bush, I found the Bible page. I need to tell you how I found it because the how matters. I was on refuse collection duty, one of the camp chores assigned by rotation, which involved walking the perimeter of the camp with a plastic bag collecting whatever had blown against the fence line overnight. Mostly it was packaging and food waste and the occasional piece of clothing too deteriorated to be wearable. I was working the eastern fence, the section nearest to where the bush started, and I almost walked past it. A piece of paper. Folded twice. Pressed flat against the fence wire by the wind, slightly damp from the previous night's dew but intact. Readable. I pulled it free. It was a page torn from a Bible. New Testament, English with Hausa translation running parallel in a second column. The page header said Yohana, John in Hausa. Chapter 14. My eyes went immediately, as if directed, to verse 6. Yesu yasi masa anayani hanya de gaskia, derai. Babu wanda zai zo wurin yuba saita wurina. Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I stood at that fence for a very long time. I am the way. I thought about the 6 months of brass sky above my prayers. I thought about Sister Grace's eyes. I thought about the word that had landed in my chest like a stone in still water. I thought about all the ways I had tried to find a path through the previous 6 months, through discipline, through ritual, through denial, through sheer stubborn survival instinct, and how none of them had led anywhere except deeper into the dark. I am the way. I folded that page and put it against my heart inside my dress. I kept it there for the next 4 weeks. I read it so many times that the fold lines wore through and I had to hold it together in 2 pieces. 117 readings. I counted those too. The small signs began almost immediately. 3 days after the Bible page, an aid worker I had never spoken to, a Kenyan woman named Wanjiku who worked with the IRC, stopped me during food distribution and pressed a small item into my hand without explanation. It was a tiny New Testament. Pocket-sized. Battered. With her name written on the inside cover and then crossed out, and below it, in different handwriting, for whoever needs this next. I looked up to ask her how she knew. She was already 20 meters away, moving through the crowd, not looking back. I held that small book in both hands and I felt the air do that thing again, that thickening, that warmth, that inhabitation. 2 weeks after that, I woke at 4 a.m. from a dream that I still cannot fully describe. I was standing somewhere vast and luminous, not heaven in the clouds and harp sense, but somewhere characterized above all else by an absolute absence of threat. Somewhere where the part of my brain that had been running threat assessment calculations every waking moment for 6 months simply went quiet. And in that quiet, I heard the voice again. Not just daughter this time. I have not forgotten you. What is coming will be hard. But I will be there before you arrive. I woke up with my heart pounding, not from fear. From the specific exhilaration of a promise. What is coming will be hard. 4 days later, I learned that Hassan Dogo had relocated his cell to our district. He was hunting again. And this time someone had told him exactly where I was. I want to speak directly to you for a moment, you watching this right now. Maybe you're Muslim and everything I've said in the last few minutes has made you deeply uncomfortable. I understand. I was you. I know the fear, not just of punishment but of betrayal. Of feeling like you are abandoning something you were born into, something your parents gave you, something woven into the fabric of your identity. I'm not asking you to abandon anything tonight. I'm just asking you to consider. Consider the possibility that the silence you've been sitting in, the brass sky above your prayers, might not be the final answer. Consider the possibility that I am the way might mean something real. Something personal. Something with your name on it. Because if Jesus could find me, a Muslim widow, a refugee number, a woman lying face down in the dirt in Borno State with nothing, he can absolutely find you. And maybe you're not Muslim. Maybe you're a Christian who has been living like miracles are history. Like the book of Acts has a last page. Like God put his pen down somewhere around 100 AD and hasn't been writing since. I need you to know, he hasn't stopped writing. He was writing in the dirt of that camp. He was writing on a page pressed against a fence. He was writing in the breathing of something large and patient and scent that waited in the bush while I fell apart and found my way to the only name that ever answered. And he was about to write the most impossible chapter yet. Music begins, quiet building. A single string. Then percussion. Slow and inevitable like a heartbeat before a sprint. The pocket New Testament went everywhere with me after that. I read it walking. I read it by the light of the generator they ran 2 hours each evening. I read it in whispers so my tent neighbors wouldn't hear, because in a camp that was 60% Muslim, a woman praying to Jesus was not a safe thing to be. I was learning to be brave about that. And I was going to need every ounce of that bravery. Because Hassan Dogo found the camp. And he brought all 12 of his men. And this time there was no running. I heard them before I saw them. That is the thing about men who have stopped caring whether you hear them coming. They don't bother with silence anymore. Silence is for hunters who respect their prey. Hassan Dogo didn't respect his prey. He collected it. And by the time he arrives, he wants you to know he's coming. He wants the fear to do half his work before he even gets to the door. It was early morning. The thin gray light that comes before the sun commits. That uncertain hour when the camp was just beginning to stir, when women were starting cooking fires and children were coughing themselves awake and the generator had been off for 3 hours and everything ran on natural light and human will alone. I was reading my pocket New Testament. Romans 8. I had reached it the night before and something had arrested me so completely I read the entire chapter 4 times before sleeping. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation, will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Neither death nor life. I read that sentence again. And then I heard the boots. My tent was in the 3rd row from the eastern perimeter, the same eastern perimeter where I had found the Bible page pressed against the fence wire. 40 meters from the bush line. 40 meters from the direction the boots were coming from. I didn't move immediately. I want to be honest with you about that because this testimony is not about me being brave. This testimony is about me being completely and utterly ordinary and God showing up anyway. The truth is, when I heard those boots, my first response was not faith. It was not prayer. It was not calm. It was paralysis. The same paralysis I had felt standing in the doorway watching the last light die behind the acacia trees the night Yusuf came to warn me. That full-body freeze that happens when the mind receives information too large to immediately process. When the gap between what you hoped would not happen and what is actually happening is too wide to cross in a single cognitive step. I sat on my mat with my pocket New Testament in both hands and I simply could not move. The boots got closer. Then I heard his voice. Hassan Dogo had a particular way of speaking that I cannot fully convey in translation. In Hausa and Kanuri mixed together with occasional Arabic, the Arabic of religious authority, dropped in like punctuation, like the stamp of a seal on a document. His voice was not loud. That was what made it more frightening than shouting. It was conversational. The voice of a man for whom violence had become so routine that it required no elevation of tone. He could discuss your death the way another man discusses the weather. I heard him say, clearly just beyond the eastern fence to the men with him, "She's in the 3rd row. Blue tent, patched with yellow plastic on the left corner. I have confirmation. She was seen reading a Christian book 3 days ago. The informant is reliable." Pause. Then, standard procedure. We take her outside the camp perimeter. I don't want a scene inside. The UN cameras are active today. Quiet extraction. Then we finish it in the bush. Quiet extraction. The bureaucratic detachment of those 2 words hit me harder than any threat could have. Quiet extraction. Like I was an administrative problem. A logistical inconvenience to be resolved with minimum disruption to the schedule. And then, one more thing. One final instruction to his men, delivered in the flat, unhurried tone of a man confirming a meeting time. If she runs, which she will, the bush on the eastern side. That's where she'll go. I want 4 men on the perimeter before we enter. She won't get 20 meters. 4 men on the perimeter. Before they even came for me. He had thought of everything. I moved then. Not with a plan, I had no plan. I moved the way a trapped animal moves, not toward anything specific but away from the immediate threat, following whatever narrow corridor of instinct remained open. I grabbed my bag, the same bag I had packed the night Yusuf warned me, the Bible, the photograph, the change of clothes, and I pushed out of the back of my tent through the gap where 2 panels never quite joined properly. The camp was waking up around me. Women at cooking fires. Children. An elderly man walking slowly toward the latrines with a water cup. Normal morning sounds that felt grotesquely inappropriate for what was happening, like background music that hasn't been updated to match the scene. I moved through the rows quickly, head down, bag against my chest. Trying to look purposeful rather than panicked because panicked women attract attention and attention was the one thing I could not afford. I made it 6 rows before I saw the first one. He was standing at the junction between rows 6 and 7. A young man, maybe 20, in civilian clothes that didn't match, the particular mismatched dressing of a fighter who has been told to blend in and has never learned how. He was scanning faces. Systematically. Row by row. His eyes moved to me. I turned left immediately, into row 7, walking fast now, and I heard him behind me, not running, just redirecting, communicating with someone through a phone pressed to his ear. Short words. Directional words. She's moving west. Row 7. Cut her off at the water point. I heard that. I was close enough to hear that. I ran. The next 4 minutes were the most disorienting of my life. I know that sounds impossible given everything else I've told you. But the chaos of the camp at full morning activity, combined with the specific terror of being hunted within a space I couldn't leave, it created a kind of sensory overload that I can only compare to being inside a nightmare where the landscape keeps rearranging itself. I ran into a group of women carrying water jerrycans on their heads and pushed through them and heard their protests behind me and kept going. I ducked under a washing line strung between 2 tents and the wet cloth hit my face cold and blind and I stumbled. A child ran across my path and I swerved and hit the corner of a tent frame with my shoulder, hard, metal, the pain bright and immediate. I kept running. I could hear them now, not just 1 but 2, maybe 3 sets of boots behind me. Still not running. Still walking. Because they didn't need to run. Because there were 4 of them on the perimeter already. Because Hassan Dogo had thought of everything. I hit the western fence. Dead end. I turned north. 20 meters of open ground between me and the next row of tents, and standing at the northern end of that open ground, arms loose at his sides, watching me with the patient expression of a man who has been waiting exactly where he was told to wait, was another one of them. I turned south. Another. I turned east, back toward where I had come from, and I saw Hassan Dogo himself. He was 40 meters away, walking toward me at that unhurried pace, machete not drawn, hands loose as if this were a stroll. Behind him 2 men. To his left, the one who had spotted me in row 7. And on the eastern perimeter, the fence, the bush, the only direction that had ever offered any exit. I could see, even at this distance, 2 more figures standing at intervals along the fence line, facing inward. 6 directions. 6 men that I could see. And Hassan Dogo walking toward me like time itself was on his side. I pressed my back against the western fence. The wire dug into my shoulders through my dress. My bag fell from my hand. The photograph of my mother, loose in the top pocket, slipped out and settled face up in the red dust at my feet. Her face looked up at me. I looked down at her. And something in my chest broke open. Not in despair. I need you to understand this, and it is perhaps the most important thing I will say in this entire testimony. It did not break open in despair. It broke open in surrender. There is a difference. Despair is the closing of a fist around nothing. Surrender is the opening of both hands. Despair says there is no way. Surrender says I have stopped pretending I can find one myself. I had done everything a human being could do. I had run. I had hidden. I had planned. I had moved through this camp like a chess piece trying to outmaneuver a player with infinitely more pieces on the board. And the player had anticipated every move before I made it. I was out of moves, so I stopped making them. I bent down. I picked up my mother's photograph. I held it against my chest with both hands, her face against my heartbeat, and I closed my eyes. And I prayed the last prayer I thought I would ever pray. Not long. Not eloquent. Not in Arabic or Hausa or any language with religious weight to it. Just plain words. Spoken out loud. To the person who had called me daughter in the dark. Jesus, this is it. I can see them coming. There is nowhere to go and I've used everything I have. I'm not asking you to save my life. I don't have the right to ask for that. I'm asking you to prove, one more time for the very last time, that you are real. Not for me. For everyone who is going to watch me die. Let them see something they cannot explain except by you. Let my death be a testimony. Let it be the thing that makes them call on your name. I paused. Hassan Dogo was 20 meters away now. I could hear his footsteps on the packed red earth. Steady. Unhurried. And if it's not time yet, if there is still something you want me to do, something I haven't done yet, then I trust you. Completely. No conditions. Whatever you do next, I receive it. You are God. I am yours. I opened my eyes. Hassan Dogo was 15 meters away. He had drawn the machete. 10 meters. He looked at me the way he had looked at me across the road that afternoon, that slow, patient, satisfied look, and he said very quietly, "Did you pray, Christian woman? Good. You'll need it." He raised the machete. 5 meters. The morning sun caught the blade and it flashed, white, blinding, a fraction of a second. And in that fraction of a second, in that sliver of time between the raising of the blade and its descent, I did one final thing. I whispered the name. Not a sentence. Not a request. Not even a prayer in any formal sense. Just the name. Jesus. And then, the air detonated. That is the only word I have for it. Not an explosion. No sound, no shockwave, no physical force against my body. But something in the atmosphere, in the quality of the space around me, underwent a sudden, violent, absolute transformation. Like the moment a dam breaks. Like the instant a held breath is released after far too long. The temperature plummeted, not gradually but instantly. As if the air had been replaced entirely with something new, something that had never been hot, something that carried in it the memory of places where fire does not exist. And with the cold came the light. Not sunlight. I want to be precise about this. The sun was already up, the ordinary Nigerian morning sun, orange going yellow, climbing the eastern sky. This was different. This was light that came from no direction. Light that seemed to originate from the air itself, from the molecules of the atmosphere directly around me, as if the space I was occupying had been suddenly filled with something luminous. And then, from the eastern bush line, 40 meters away, something stepped out. I heard it before I fully saw it. A sound that I have no adequate comparison for. If you took thunder and compressed it into a living throat, if you took the memory of every dangerous thing that has ever existed and gave it a voice, that is approximately what a lion's roar sounds like from 40 meters in open ground. Approximately. Because no description I can give you will be sufficient for what I heard in that moment. The sound didn't just enter my ears. It reorganized something in my nervous system. Ancient. Primal. The part of human biology that has known, for 100,000 years, exactly what that sound means. It means, there is something here that is bigger than you. The camp went silent. I mean that literally. Every sound, the cooking fires, the children, the morning activity of 10,000 people, stopped. As if someone had pressed a finger to the lips of the entire world. And in that silence, the lion walked forward. It was enormous. I have seen photographs of lions. I have seen them in documentaries. Nothing prepares you for the physical reality of a full-grown male lion at close range in the open air. The size alone is staggering, not the two-dimensional size of a photograph, but the volumetric reality of an animal that occupies space the way mountains occupy space. Undeniably, immovably, completely there. His mane was the color of dark amber and shadow, thick, wild, extending not just around his face but down his chest and shoulders like a king's mantle. His paws hit the red Borno earth with a weight you could feel in the ground. His tail moved in long, slow arcs, not agitated, not uncertain. Deliberate. The movement of an animal that is exactly where it intends to be, doing exactly what it came to do. And his eyes. I will not pretend I can fully describe his eyes. I will say only this, they were golden. And they were calm. Not the calm of an animal that hasn't noticed the humans around it. The calm of an animal that has noticed everything, every person, every weapon, every exit, and has made its calculations and is entirely at peace with the outcome. He walked to the center of the open ground between the tents. He stopped. And he turned, slowly, deliberately, until he was facing Hassan Dogo. I watched Hassan Dogo's face in the moment he saw the lion. I watched the machete hand drop. I watched the color leave his face, not metaphorically but visibly, the particular gray that comes when blood retreats from the surface of the skin in response to something the body recognizes as a threat of a category it has no protocol for. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. One of the men behind him, the one who had spotted me in row 7, made a sound. Not a word. Not a threat. A sound. The sound a person makes when something occurs that their entire worldview has no category for. A sound that is half breath and half voice and entirely undone. The lion rolled its head toward him. And roared again. If the first roar had reorganized my nervous system, this one restructured the geography. I felt it in my sternum. In my back teeth. In the soles of my feet against the ground. The sound rolled outward through the camp like a physical thing. A wave, a pressure. And I heard, from every direction around me, the responses of 10,000 people encountering something their lives had not prepared them for. Screaming. Running. Children grabbed. Mothers pulling tent flaps closed. Somewhere, a man calling on God in a language I didn't recognize. And Hassan Dogo's 12 men. They broke. Not all at once. There was a suspended moment, a collective hesitation, the moment a group of people simultaneously calculates whether their weapons are adequate to the situation and arrives simultaneously at the answer no, and then they broke. The ones on the perimeter went first. I heard them crashing through the fence wire. Then the two behind Hassan Dogo. Running. Not the tactical retreat of trained fighters repositioning. Running. The running of men who have left their training and their ideology and their certainty behind them entirely, stripped down to nothing but the oldest instruction the human body carries. Survive. Hassan Dogo was last. He stood there for 3 more seconds, machete still in his dropped hand, eyes fixed on the lion, and for those 3 seconds I saw something on his face that I had not seen there before and did not expect to see. Terror. Not the calculated intimidation he deployed as a weapon. Not the performance of threat. Real, structural, foundational terror. The terror of a man whose entire sense of himself, his power, his invincibility, his certainty that he was the most dangerous thing in any room, had been dismantled in the space of 30 seconds by an animal that had walked out of the bush and positioned itself between him and a woman with a pocket Bible and her dead mother's photograph. He looked at me. His eyes asked a question his mouth couldn't form. I answered it anyway. Jesus, I said. Quietly. Clearly. That's who sent him. Hassan Dogo ran. And I was left alone. In the middle of a refugee camp that had gone from ordinary morning activity to absolute silence. With a lion. A lion who turned, now that the men were gone, and walked toward me with the same slow, deliberate, unhurried purpose with which he had walked out of the bush. He stopped 4 feet away. I could feel his breath. Warm. Enormous. Alive in a way that felt almost, I know how this sounds, intentional. He looked at me. Those golden, calm, impossible eyes. And I did the only thing left to do. I fell to my knees in the red dust of Maiduguri IDP camp, with my mother's photograph against my heart and my pocket New Testament in my bag and 6 months of accumulated grief and silence and despair dissolving in real time, and I worshipped. Out loud. In a refugee camp. In front of 10,000 witnesses. You are real, I said. You are real. You are real. You are real. I said it 7 times. It felt like not enough. I want to stop time here. Right here. Right at this moment, me on my knees in the red dust, the lion 4 feet away, 10,000 people frozen in absolute silence around us. I want to stop time because I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened over the next 3 days. I need you to understand what I was. I was not a prophet. I was not a saint. I was not a woman of extraordinary faith who had spent years building a spiritual resume impressive enough to merit a divine bodyguard. I was a widow with a plastic bracelet and a number on it, wearing a dress that hadn't been properly washed in 11 days, holding a photograph of my dead mother, in a refugee camp in one of the most forgotten corners of the earth, with no money and no family and no plan and no future that I could see from where I was kneeling. I was nothing. And that is exactly the point. Because the God who sent this lion didn't send him for someone impressive. He sent him for someone broken. He sent him for someone who had finally, completely run out of everything except one name. If you take nothing else from this testimony, take that. You don't have to be impressive. You just have to be empty enough to say the name. Now let me tell you what happened next. The lion did not leave. That was the first impossible thing. After the appearance itself, after the roar that dismantled Hassan Dogo's certainty, after the fleeing of 12 armed men, the lion simply stayed. He walked a slow circuit of the open area around me, not agitated, not patrolling in the anxious way of a caged animal. Deliberately. Methodically. As if he were measuring the space, acquainting himself with its dimensions, establishing in some animal and yet entirely intentional way that this ground was now his. That what stood on it was his to keep. Then he came back. He lay down. 3 feet from where I was still kneeling. And he put his head on his enormous paws and he looked at me with those golden eyes and he sighed. I want you to sit with that for a moment. A wild lion. A full-grown male apex predator of the African savanna, an animal that in any normal configuration of reality should have been as dangerous to me as Hassan Dogo's machete, sighed. The way a dog sighs when it has found its spot and settled in for the duration. The way a guardian sighs when the person they were sent to protect is finally, safely, in sight. I reached out my hand. I don't know why. I don't recommend this as general wildlife advice. But in that moment, the impulse was so natural, so unambiguous. The way you reach towards something you already know will not hurt you, that my hand was moving before my mind had finished forming the thought. My fingers touched his mane. Coarse. Warm. Alive in a way that sent a current through my entire arm, not electrical, not painful, but real. The undeniable physical reality of something that should not be happening completely. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. He closed his eyes. The camp found its voice again slowly. First one sound, then another, then a rising tide of noise that was entirely different from the ordinary morning sounds that had preceded the lion's arrival. This was the sound of people trying to process the impossible. 1,000 simultaneous conversations happening in lowered voices, in Hausa and Kanuri and Fulfulde and the clipped English of aid workers, each one a different person arriving at the same destination. This should not be happening. I became aware of a figure approaching carefully from my left. Slowly. Hands visible. The universal human gesture of I mean no harm. It was Wanjiku, the IRC field coordinator who had pressed the New Testament into my hand weeks earlier. She was moving toward me with the careful, measured steps of a woman who has spent 20 years in field environments and knows how to approach uncertain situations, which I imagine had never before included a refugee woman kneeling next to a lion in the middle of a displacement camp in Borno State. She stopped 8 feet away. She looked at the lion. She looked at me. She looked at the lion again. Then, and I will never forget this as long as I live, she sat down cross-legged on the ground right where she stood, and she put her face in both hands. Not from fear. I could see her shoulders moving. She was weeping. Later, much later, 3 days later, when everything had resolved and she was writing her incident report and I was sitting across from her in the IRC field office, she told me what she had been thinking in that moment. She said, I have been in this work for 21 years. I have seen things in the field, things in Sudan, in South Sudan, in DRC, that I cannot explain by training or protocol or anything I learned in graduate school. Moments where the only category available is divine. But I have never, not once in 21 years, seen anything like what I saw that morning. And I'm not a religious woman, Amara. I want to be honest with you about that. I'm not a religious woman. But what I saw in that camp, what that lion did and what it did not do for 3 days, I am a scientist and a humanitarian and I am telling you with complete professional sincerity that there is no natural explanation for what occurred. None. She paused. Then she said, I think I need to find a church. She did. I know this because she sent me a message 8 months later. But that is a different story. The first day passed in a state of suspended reality. The camp authorities, frantically calling their chain of command, receiving instructions that I imagine were spectacularly unhelpful given that the situation had no precedent in any emergency management manual, eventually established a loose perimeter around the area where the lion had settled. Not a close perimeter. Nobody wanted to be close. But a perimeter of watching, of witnessing, of the kind of compelled observation you cannot look away from even when every sensible instinct says you should. People brought food. Not for me, for the lion. I watched this happen with a kind of wondering amazement. 3 different people, over the course of that first afternoon, approached carefully and left offerings, a large piece of raw goat meat, a fish, something wrapped in paper I couldn't identify, at a respectful distance and then retreated quickly. The instinct was ancient and cross-cultural and entirely spontaneous. When something sacred appears, you feed it. The lion ignored the food entirely. All 3 offerings. He didn't turn his head toward them. Didn't acknowledge them. He lay beside me, changing position occasionally, sometimes rising to walk his slow circuit and then returning, and he did not eat. For 3 days. The lion. Not eating. A wild apex predator with a metabolic requirement for approximately 15 pounds of meat daily, sitting in a refugee camp in Borno State, not eating, not sleeping deeply, not leaving for 72 hours. Wanjiku documented this. She had a field camera. She took photographs and video on the first day, professional, methodical, because 21 years of field work had taught her that when the impossible happens, you document it, and she told me later that when she reviewed the footage her hands were shaking. She sent the footage to 3 wildlife biologists she knew from field placements in East Africa. All 3 said the same thing in different words. This is not normal lion behavior. This is not explainable by any territorial, predatory, or stress response mechanism we have categories for. We don't know what you're looking at. The second night was when the militia came back. I need to tell you about the second night. Hassan Dogo had regrouped. I found this out afterward from one of his men, a man named Musa Goni, 23 years old, who had been with Hassan Dogo for 2 years and who came to me 6 days after everything ended, trembling and sleepless, wanting to talk about what he had seen. But I will tell you what he told me when I get to chapter 7. What I knew in the moment was only what I could hear. Voices beyond the eastern perimeter fence in the first hour after midnight. Oh, multiple. The particular cadence of men who are arguing about whether to proceed. I was not asleep. I had not really slept in 2 days. I was sitting with my back against a tent frame, the lion lying across the entrance of my tent, not inside but across the entrance, his body a living door, reading my pocket New Testament by the thin light of a battery lamp an IRC worker had left me. I heard the voices, and I felt the lion hear them too. He didn't rise immediately. He raised his head, that enormous amber head, and he turned it toward the eastern fence with a slowness that was almost contemplative. He held that position for maybe 20 seconds, listening, processing. Then he stood. And he walked, not toward me, not in a circle, but directly, purposefully, in a straight line toward the eastern perimeter fence. He stopped 10 meters from the fence. And he roared. I have tried to describe a lion's roar already. I told you about the first one, the one that stopped the camp in its morning tracks, the one that reorganized my nervous system. This one was different. The first roar was announcement. I am here. I have arrived. Recalibrate your understanding of this situation. This one was warning. If the first roar was thunder, this one was the moment before lightning, a sound that carried in it not just volume but intention. Specific, directed, personal intention. The sound of a guardian who has identified a threat and is communicating with perfect clarity exactly one message. Not tonight. Not this one. Not while I am here. The voices beyond the fence went silent. The lion held his position at the perimeter for a long time. I watched him from where I sat, his silhouette against the faint moonlight, still as a statue facing outward. Patient. Immovable. A wall with a heartbeat. After 20 minutes he walked back. He lay back across the entrance to my tent. He sighed again. And I opened my New Testament to Romans 8 and read it one more time and wept quietly with gratitude that I didn't have adequate words for, so I just repeated the name instead. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Each repetition feeling less like a prayer and more like a conversation. Less like a cry for help and more like the speech of someone learning, word by word, how to talk to a person they love. On the morning of the third day, something shifted. I felt it before I saw it, that change in the air, that thickening that I had learned to recognize as the presence of something beyond the physical. But different this time. Not the urgent, protective density of the previous 2 days. Something quieter. Something that felt, if I had to name it, like completion. Like a task winding down. Like a messenger preparing to return home. The lion had been lying beside me since before dawn. He rose at first light, slowly, with a particular unhurried dignity that characterized every movement he made, and he stretched. A full, enormous, entirely domestic stretch that would have been almost comical in any other context. Then he stood and he looked at me. Those eyes. Golden. Come. Carrying in them something I had no name for then and have only partial names for now, something between recognition and commission. The look of one being to another that says, I see you. I have seen you. Now, go. I stood up. I don't know what made me do what I did next. I reached out both hands, palms up, open, the way you hold your hands in worship. And I said quietly to this lion who had stood between me and death for 3 days, thank you. Tell him thank you. The lion held my gaze for 3 more seconds. And then he did something that I have replayed in my mind every single day for 2 years, something that I have described to every person I have told this story to, something that Wanjiku, standing 20 feet away with her field camera, capturing every second, confirmed on video, in footage that she has shown to the 3 wildlife biologists and a theologian at the University of Nairobi and an imam in Maiduguri who came to me afterward weeping and asking to know more about Jesus. The lion lowered his head, slowly, deliberately, all the way down until his chin nearly touched the red Borno earth. He held it there for 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3, and then he raised it. He turned. And he walked, that same slow, deliberate, purposeful walk, toward the eastern fence, through the gap that the fleeing men had torn in the wire 2 nights before. He walked into the bush. He did not look back. He was gone. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. And then the camp erupted. Not in fear. The fear had transmuted over 3 days into something else entirely. This was the sound of people who have witnessed the impossible and cannot contain the response it generates. Shouting, crying, praying, in at least 4 languages, to at least 2 different names for God, though several voices I heard were calling on Jesus specifically, some of them for the first time. A woman I had never spoken to ran toward me and grabbed both my hands and said, in Hausa, tears streaming, "Who is your God? Who is he? Tell me his name." I told her. She repeated it. Jesus. Quiet and wondering. Like tasting something for the first time and recognizing immediately that you have been hungry for exactly this your whole life. An elderly man, Muslim, traditional cap, prayer beads, sat down in the dirt where the lion had lain and pressed both his palms flat against the ground and stayed there for a long time, eyes closed. I don't know what he was doing exactly, but I know what it looked like. It looked like reverence. And then there was Khalid. I have saved Khalid for this moment because Khalid is the detail that, every time I tell this story, makes people go silent in a different way. A deeper way. The way people go silent when something cuts past the miraculous but external and arrives at something personal. Khalid was one of Hassan Dogo's men. Not Musa Goni, I'll tell you about him in a moment. Khalid was different. Khalid had been on the perimeter the second night. He had been one of the voices I heard arguing beyond the eastern fence. He had been one of the men the lion's warning roar had stopped. He came to me on the morning the lion left. He was 26. He had joined Boko Haram at 17 after his village was burned, ironically by a rival faction, a detail that tells you everything about the particular hell of that region, where the lines between perpetrator and victim are drawn and redrawn by geography and timing and terrible luck. He had been carrying a weapon for 9 years. He had done things he could not speak about yet, things I saw in his eyes and did not ask him to name. He came to me with no weapon. Hands open, the way Wanjiku had approached me 3 days earlier. He stood in front of me and he said, and his voice broke on almost every word, I was there. Both nights. I was there the first morning too, on the perimeter when it appeared. I have killed people. I have burned villages. I have never, not once, been afraid. Not of anything. He stopped. Swallowed. I was afraid of that lion. But it wasn't the lion that broke me. I waited. It was you, he said. It was watching you. 3 days, no food, barely sleep, 12 of us surrounding you, Hassan Dogo with a machete 5 meters from your face, and you were peaceful. You were more peaceful than any person I have ever seen in my life. And the lion lay down next to you like you were its cub. And I thought, what does this woman have that makes a wild lion lie down next to her and makes men like me afraid to come near her? What does she know that I don't know? His eyes were very direct, very raw. Every defense stripped away. Tell me, he said. Tell me what you know. Tell me who Jesus is. I told him. Right there. In the red dust of Maiduguri IDP camp, with the imprint of a lion's body still pressed into the earth beside us. I told him everything, from Sister Grace's hands in mine to the word in the dark, to the Bible page on the fence, to Romans 8, to the name I had whispered with Hassan Dogo's machete raised above my head. Khalid listened without moving. When I finished he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, pray with me. I want to pray to him. We knelt together in the red dust. And Khalid, a Boko Haram fighter with 9 years of violence behind him and a past he would spend years learning to bring to Jesus piece by piece, said the most imperfect, most sincere, most beautiful prayer I have ever heard in my life. Jesus, I have been told you are not God. I have been told you are not real. I have been told killing your people makes me holy. I don't know everything yet. I don't know how to be different yet. But I know what I saw. I know what that lion did. And I know that woman's face. So I am asking you, if you will have me with everything I have done, take me. Change me. I am yours. He wept. I wept. Somewhere behind us, a woman who had been watching began to sing. Yesu yamuta dominan. Jesus died for me. And one by one, like flames catching from a single source, other voices joined her. 23 people came to Jesus in the days immediately following the lion's departure. I counted them myself, not because numbers matter more than people, but because I wanted to be able to say with precision, to every person who would later ask me if it really happened, 23. I know their names. I know their faces. I was there when each of them prayed. 23. In a refugee camp. Because a lion spent 3 days lying next to a woman with nothing but a pocket New Testament and her dead mother's photograph. If that is not the book of Acts in 2023, I do not know what is. And Hassan Dogo? He was found 3 days after he fled the camp, in a village 20 kilometers east. He was not dead. He was not injured. He was sitting in the dirt outside an abandoned building, machete on the ground beside him, staring at nothing. 3 of his men were with him, the ones who hadn't scattered entirely. They were all in the same condition. Sitting, staring, as if something in them had been switched off. A local pastor found them. He said when he approached, Hassan Dogo looked up at him and said, with none of the command or authority that had defined every other recorded interaction anyone had with this man, is it true what the Christians say about their God? Is it true he sends armies? Is it true he controls even the animals? The pastor said, yes. I can tell you about him if you want to know. Hassan Dogo was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I want to know. I cannot verify what happened to Hassan Dogo after that conversation. I know what the pastor told me. I know what I believe. I know that the man who walked into that refugee camp with 12 armed men and a machete and the patience of someone who has never not gotten what he came for, did not walk out of that region the same man. What I know for certain is that he never came back for me. And in that part of Borno State, in the months that followed, the attacks on Christian communities in our district dropped to almost nothing. Almost nothing. Whether that is coincidence or consequence, I leave to you to decide. I know what I believe. Music, full, sweeping, triumphant. The sound of something ancient and undefeated. People ask me sometimes, were you afraid of the lion? And the honest answer is, for the first 30 seconds, yes. Everything in me was afraid. The ancient parts. The instinctive parts. But then he looked at me. And I realized, and I cannot explain how I realized this, only that I did, with the same certainty that I knew the word daughter had been real, I realized that this animal was not looking at me the way a predator looks at prey. He was looking at me the way a soldier looks at the person he was sent to protect. With recognition. With commitment. With the absolute, unwavering, utterly reliable certainty of an assignment that will be completed. He had been sent. And he would not leave until the job was done. Daniel understood this. 3,000 years ago, in a pit in Babylon, Daniel understood exactly what I understood in that camp. That the God who made the lion also holds the lion's nature in his hands. That the same God who said let there be light can say lie down to an apex predator and be obeyed without question. He is that God. He has always been that God. And he is still that God today. In 2023. In a refugee camp in Borno State. With a widow who had nothing. And a lion who had been told exactly where to go. I know what you're thinking. Maybe you've been thinking it since chapter 1. Maybe you've been holding it at arm's length. This polite, reasonable, entirely understandable skepticism that says, this is a compelling story, but stories can be constructed. Emotions can be manufactured. A woman in a refugee camp with nothing to lose and everything to gain from a dramatic narrative could, theoretically, invent every detail of what you've just heard. I understand that thought completely. I had that thought about other people's testimonies before I had my own. So let me do something I promised at the beginning of this testimony I would do. Let me give you the witnesses. Not impressions. Not feelings. Not the interior landscape of one woman's spiritual transformation. Witnesses. People with names and positions and professional reputations and, in several cases, documented records. People who had no theological agenda, no community to impress, no reason whatsoever to fabricate or embellish what they saw. People who saw exactly what I saw. And could not explain it. Witness 1. Wanjiku Kamau, IRC Field Coordinator, Kenya. Wanjiku had been with the International Rescue Committee for 21 years when she witnessed what happened in that camp. She had field placements in South Sudan, DRC, Somalia, and northern Nigeria. She had a master's degree in humanitarian response from the University of Nairobi and a professional reputation that, by her own description, she had spent 2 decades building with meticulous care. She is not a woman who speaks carelessly. She documented the 3 days in her field notes. Contemporaneous, time-stamped records that she filed as part of her standard incident reporting. The report ran to 14 pages. I have read it. She gave me a copy. I want to read you one paragraph directly because her words are more precise than mine. Between the hours of approximately 0630 on day 1 and approximately 0715 on day 3, a full-grown male African lion of estimated age 6 to 8 years remained within the perimeter of Sector 7 of the Maiduguri IDP camp. During this period, the animal demonstrated no predatory behavior toward any of the approximately 10,400 camp residents. The animal consumed no food during this period despite multiple offerings being placed within accessible range. The animal appeared to maintain a consistent proximity to one specific individual, a female adult resident identified as Amara, and demonstrated what can only be described as protective positioning on at least 2 documented occasions, including one nighttime perimeter confrontation during which the animal vocalized in the direction of individuals outside the camp fence, after which those individuals departed and did not return. She paused in her professional language for one sentence at the end of that paragraph. One sentence that cost her something, I think, that required her to step outside the vocabulary of her training into territory she had no professional map for. I have no naturalistic explanation for what I observed. None. I asked her later what it felt like to write that sentence. A scientist and humanitarian worker writing I have no naturalistic explanation in an official IRC field report. She said, terrifying. And completely necessary. Because the alternative was to lie. And I have spent 21 years refusing to lie about what I see in the field, no matter how uncomfortable the truth is. She paused. This was the most uncomfortable truth I have ever had to report. She smiled when she said it. The smile of someone who has found, in discomfort, something that feels strangely like home. Witness 2. Dr. Emeka Okafor, MSF Field Physician, Maiduguri. Dr. Okafor was 38 years old, trained at the University of Lagos and subsequently at a teaching hospital in Paris. He had been with Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, for 6 years. He was the senior medical officer at the camp clinic during the 3 days of the lion's presence. He examined me on the morning of the 3rd day after the lion left. His examination was thorough, professional, and, by his own account, increasingly baffling. He told me afterward, I was looking for stress injuries primarily. Elevated cortisol markers, sleep deprivation symptoms, nutritional depletion. All entirely expected given your circumstances over the previous 72 hours. What I was not looking for, because I had no reason to expect it, was what I actually found. He paused in the particular way that medical professionals pause when the data contradicts the framework. Your vital signs were better than they had been at your last examination 3 weeks prior. Blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen saturation, all improved. Your cortisol levels, which I would have predicted to be severely elevated after 3 days of acute stress, were within normal range. Your sleep deprivation markers were present but mild, inconsistent with the level of disruption you should have experienced. He removed his glasses and cleaned them, the doctor's version of taking a breath. And the cuts on your feet from the thorns, the ones you sustained during your initial flight from the camp, were significantly more healed than 3 days of standard recovery would account for. The tissue regeneration rate was accelerated. In my professional opinion, anomalously so. He put his glasses back on. I have no medical explanation for this. I included it in my patient notes. I flagged it for review by my supervising physician in Amsterdam. Their response, essentially, was that field conditions create unpredictable variables. Which is true. And which is not, in this case, a sufficient explanation. He looked at me for a long moment. Amara, he said carefully, the voice of a man measuring each word before releasing it, I am not a religious person. I was raised Catholic and departed from that at university and have not returned. But I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Of course, I said. During those 3 days, with the lion in the camp during the nighttime confrontation, were you afraid? I thought about it carefully. The honest answer. For the first 30 seconds, I said. And then no. Not at all. He nodded slowly. That, he said, may be the most medically inexplicable thing you've told me. Because by every physiological measure, you should have been in a sustained fear response for 72 consecutive hours. The threat environment was extreme. The sleep deprivation alone should have degraded your emotional regulation significantly. He closed his notebook. Instead, you present like someone who just returned from a retreat. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'd like to know more about Jesus if you're willing to talk. I was willing. We talked for 2 hours. Dr. Okafor's journey is his own to tell, and I will not tell it for him. But I will say that when he left that conversation, he was carrying my pocket New Testament, the one Wanjiku had given me, the one I had read 117 times, because he asked if he could borrow it and I told him to keep it. He has never given it back. Witness 3. Professor Adiz Naji, wildlife biologist, University of Ibadan. Professor Naji was not present at the camp. She reviewed Wanjiku's video footage and field notes remotely, at Wanjiku's request. She had spent 30 years studying large carnivore behavior in West and Central Africa. She had published extensively on lion territorial and social behavior in fragmented habitats. Her written response to Wanjiku's documentation was 3 pages long. I will give you the essential paragraph. The behavior described and documented does not conform to any known pattern of lion behavior in any context, wild, semi-habituated, or captive. The sustained proximity to a specific human individual, the apparent protective positioning, the vocalization directed outward rather than inward, the complete absence of predatory or threat behavior toward the human population of the camp, and most significantly the 3-day food refusal. None of these behaviors exist in the literature as a coherent behavioral pattern. Individually, some of these behaviors have been documented in specific contexts. As a constellation in this context, they have not. I cannot provide a behavioral explanation for what the documentation appears to show. This is not a conclusion I reach easily or comfortably, as it implies the existence of a causative factor outside my professional framework. She added one final line, handwritten at the bottom of the typed document, which Wanjiku showed me when she gave me the printed copy. I find I am praying for the first time in 30 years. I'm not entirely sure to whom. But I suspect I know. Witness 4, Musa Goni. Musa Goni was 23 years old when he came to me. I told you about him briefly in Chapter 6, one of Hassan Dogo's men with the unit for 2 years. He found me 6 days after the Lion left, in the IRC field office where I had been temporarily relocated for my safety. He came alone. No weapon. He had walked 22 kilometers on foot to find me. I know this because he told me, and because his feet were in the condition of someone who had been walking on rough ground for most of a day. He sat down across from me and he was quiet for a long time before he spoke. Then he said, "I need to tell you what I saw. Not for you, you were there. For me. I need to say it out loud to someone who will understand what it means." "Tell me," I said. He pressed both palms flat on the table between us, the gesture of a man grounding himself before saying something that might otherwise float away into the realm of the unspeakable. "The first morning," he said, "when the Lion appeared, I was on the eastern perimeter. I was one of the 4 Hassan Dogo stationed there to cut you off. When the Lion came out of the bush, it passed within 5 meters of me." He paused. It looked at me. Another pause. Longer. "I have looked into the eyes of many animals in my life. I have hunted. I have been in the bush since I was a child. I know what animal eyes look like. I know what a predator's assessment looks like, that calculation, that sizing up, that decision-making process." He shook his head slowly. "This Lion looked at me and it was not calculating whether I was prey. It was not assessing me as a threat. It looked at me the way—" He stopped, closed his eyes, opened them. "It looked at me the way a judge looks at a man in a courtroom. Like it already knew everything about me. Everything I had done. Every village. Every person. Knew. And it was not afraid of me. It turned away from me like I was irrelevant. Like I was already dealt with. Like my case had already been decided and it didn't need to concern itself with me." His voice broke on the last sentence. "I dropped my gun," he said. "Right there. On the perimeter. I just put it on the ground and walked away. I didn't run like the others. I walked. Because something in me knew that running was pointless. That whatever was happening in that camp was something I could not outrun. Could not outfight. Could not outsmart." He looked at me directly. "I want to know if Jesus will forgive what I have done. Not, he pressed harder on the table, not because I want to feel better. Not because I want to escape consequence. I know I cannot escape consequence and I am not asking to. I am asking if he is the kind of God who can look at what I am, what I actually am, the full thing, not a cleaned-up version, and still want me." I had been praying quietly the entire time he was speaking. The answer came to me the way answers had been coming to me since that night in the bush. Not constructed, not retrieved from memory, but given. Placed. The way you place a key in someone's hand. I said, "Musa." The man who hung on the cross next to Jesus had done terrible things too. And Jesus said to him, "Today you will be with me in paradise. Not tomorrow. Not after sufficient penance. Today." That is the kind of God he is. Musa Goni put his face in his hands. And wept for 20 minutes. When he stopped, he looked up and his face was different. Not transformed in some dramatic cinematic sense, he still looked exhausted, still looked like a man carrying enormous weight. But underneath the exhaustion and the weight, something was different. Something had been unlocked. "Pray with me," he said. We prayed. Musa Goni is currently working with a reconciliation ministry in Maiduguri that helps former combatants and their victims begin the long, painful, absolutely necessary process of building something out of the rubble of what was destroyed. This is not my information to elaborate on. It is his story to tell. But I tell you this, he is the most serious Christian I know. Not the most comfortable. The most serious. The kind of faith that has been through fire doesn't produce comfortable Christians. It produces people who understand at a cellular level what they were saved from. Witness 5. Imam Ibrahim Bello. This is perhaps the testimony I am most careful with, because Imam Bello is still living in a region where his safety depends on a degree of discretion that I must honor. I will tell you only what he gave me permission to share. Imam Bello led the largest mosque in the Camp District. He was 64 years old. He had been an imam for 35 years. He was, by every description I ever heard, a moderate and learned man. A man who preached against extremism, who had sheltered Christian families in his mosque compound during 2 separate attacks, who was respected across religious lines in the community. He came to me on the 5th day after the Lion left. He came with his prayer beads and his white cap and the particular dignity of a man who has spent a lifetime in religious authority and is now sitting across from a refugee woman in a borrowed dress with a borrowed Bible, and is entirely at peace with the reversal. He said, I watched everything. All 3 days. I was watching from the window of the aid station. I did not come closer because I needed to see it without being seen, without my presence changing what was happening. He was quiet for a moment. I have spent 35 years studying the nature of God. I have read the Torah and the Injil, the Gospel, as well as the Quran. I have prayed 5 times a day without missing a single prayer in 35 years. I have sought the face of God with everything I have. He folded his hands. What I saw in that camp, what that lion did and what happened to the men who came with weapons, and what I saw on your face during 3 days when any rational person would have been terrified, I know what I saw. I am 64 years old and I have been seeking God my entire life and I know what His presence looks like when it arrives. He looked at me steadily. Tell me about Isa, Jesus in Arabic. Not what I was taught. What you know. What you experienced. I told him everything. He listened for a long time without interrupting, which is not a small thing for a man who has spent 35 years being the one who speaks while others listen. When I finished, he was silent for several minutes. Then he said, I am not ready to make a declaration today. I am an old man with a community that depends on me and a faith I have lived inside for 6 decades. I will not pretend that this is simple. He paused. But I will tell you this, I am going to read the Injil again. From the beginning. And I am going to ask God, the real God, whoever He fully is, to show me what I may have missed. He stood, straightened his cap. And I want you to know, he turned back at the door, that what happened in this camp will be the thing I think about for the rest of my life. The line. Your face. The men who ran. These are not things a person forgets. He left. I have heard from him twice since then. Indirectly, through a mutual contact for safety reasons. The messages were brief. The second one, received 4 months after our conversation, contained only one line. I asked. He answered. I know now. I wept when I read it. Let me tell you about the 23. I counted them as they came, not efficiently, not organizationally because I had no organization. I was a refugee woman with a pocket Bible and no formal training and no church structure and no pastor and no support system. I was entirely unqualified for what was happening. God apparently did not consider this a disqualifying factor. They came in 1s and 2s and small groups over the 5 days following the lion's departure. They came with questions and with confessions and with the particular rawness of people who have just had their carefully constructed worldview dismantled by something they cannot rationalize away. They came at odd hours, a woman at 3 a.m. who could not sleep, a young man during the midday meal distribution, 2 teenage girls who had been watching from a distance all 3 days and finally worked up the courage to approach. They were Hausa, Kanuri, Fulani, one Chadian woman who spoke only French and Arabic and with whom I communicated in broken Arabic and hand gestures and the universal language of tears. They were Muslim backgrounds, one man who described himself as a traditional religionist, 2 who said they had never believed in anything. Every single one of them had the same thing in common. They had seen the lion. And the lion had broken something open in them that years of normal life had kept sealed. I prayed with each of them individually, held their hands, told them what I knew, which was not much measured in theological terms, but was everything measured in personal experience. I told them about the word in the dark. I told them about Romans 8. I told them about the name that answers. And one by one, imperfectly, incompletely, in broken prayers in multiple languages, they chose it. 23 people. In 5 days. Because God sent a lion to a refugee camp in Borno State. But here is the thing about miracles that nobody tells you. Nobody tells you that the miracle doesn't make you safe. It makes you significant. And in a war zone, significant is another word for targeted. By the end of the first week after the lion left, I had received 3 warnings through different channels. Hassan Dogo's remaining loyalists. A competing faction that had heard about the conversions and considered them an act of spiritual warfare against their community. A local extremist who had been radicalized in the camp itself and who took particular personal offense at an imam's apparent softening toward a Christian woman. 3 warnings. In 7 days. Wanjiku came to me on the 8th day with a UNHCR emergency relocation form and a look on her face that said, "We are past the point of waiting to see what happens next." She said, "Amara, I have documented everything. The footage, the field notes, the medical records, the witness statements. It is all filed and copied and stored in 3 separate locations. Your testimony is safe. But you need to move. Tonight if possible." I looked around the tent that had been my home for 6 months. The mat. The battery lamp. The place on the ground where the lion had lain for 3 days. I had been keeping it clear, not consciously, just unable to bring myself to put anything there. The eastern fence where the Bible page had pressed itself against the wire and waited for me. I felt the same thing I had felt on the morning the lion left. Completion. One chapter ending. The next one, unknown and terrifying and completely in his hands. I picked up my bag. I said goodbye to the ground where the lion had lain. I know how that sounds, I'm not apologizing for it. And I walked toward whatever God had decided came next. I want to speak to someone specific right now. Maybe you're watching this and you've been a Christian for 20 years and you have never seen a miracle. Not one. And somewhere underneath the doctrine and the Sunday services and the worship songs you've sung 1,000 times, somewhere underneath all of that, there is a question you're afraid to ask out loud. Does God still show up? Does he still actually do things? Or did the miracles stop with the apostles and the rest is just faith in an absence? I need you to hear me. Wanjika Kamau has 14 pages of field notes that say he still shows up. Dr. Emeka Okafor has patient records that say he still heals. Professor Naji has a handwritten note at the bottom of a scientific analysis that says he still moves in ways that break professional frameworks. Musa Goni has a testimony that says he still redeems the unredeemable. And Imam Ibrahim Bello, 64 years old, 35 years of Islamic scholarship, has a forward message that says he still answers when you ask. I asked. He answered. Stop living like the book is closed. It is not closed. I am standing here, alive, breathing, speaking because it is not closed. People ask me what I have now. It's a reasonable question. It's the question that follows naturally from everything I've told you. The village burned, the husband taken, the camp, the hunting, the 12 men, the 3 warnings in 7 days, the emergency relocation in the dark. What does Amara have now? Let me tell you exactly. I have one bag. The same bag I packed the night Yusuf came to warn me. It has traveled with me through 4 relocations, 2 border crossings, and 1 river I will not describe because the memory of that crossing still arrives at 3 a.m. sometimes and sits on my chest until dawn. I have a photograph of my mother, slightly creased now along one diagonal where it pressed against my heart during the worst night of my life. I have a pocket New Testament, not the same one. That one I gave to Dr. Okafor. This one was given to me by a pastor's wife in the settlement where I currently live, who pressed it into my hands the first Sunday I walked through the door of their house church. A mud brick room with 12 plastic chairs and a wooden cross on the wall and no sound system and no budget and more of the presence of God than any building I have ever entered in my life. I have the names of 23 people written in the back pages of that New Testament. 23 names. I pray through them every morning before I do anything else. Some of them I have lost contact with. The chaos of displacement scatters people like seeds, and not all seeds can be tracked. But I pray for them by name anyway because God knows where each of them is even when I don't. And I have a story. An impossible, undeniable, professionally documented, multiply-witnessed, biologically inexplicable, theologically overwhelming story that I have now told, in settlement common rooms and IRC debriefing offices and pastors' living rooms and once standing in the open air at a displacement gathering with 200 people sitting on the ground in front of me, more times than I can count. And every single time I tell it, without exception, someone meets Jesus. That is what I have. And I want to tell you something with complete sincerity. I have never been richer in my life. I want to tell you what daily life looks like now because I think people who hear testimonies like this sometimes imagine that the miracle creates a permanent state of supernatural ease. That after the lion, everything becomes simple. That faith, once tested by fire and proven by a wild animal lying at your feet, operates in a continuous state of mountaintop clarity. It doesn't. Let me be honest with you about that because you deserve honesty more than you deserve a tidy narrative. There are mornings I wake up and the grief is right there, immediate, physical, sitting on my sternum before I have taken my first conscious breath. The grief for my husband. The grief for my village. The grief for Sister Grace's hands and the specific warmth of them and the fact that I will not feel that warmth again on this side of eternity. Grief for the woman I was before all of this. The woman who ground millet in the morning and knew her neighbors and had a future she could see the rough shape of. That woman is gone. I don't get her back. And some mornings that is a heavy thing to carry. But here is what I have learned, and this is perhaps the most practically important thing I will say in this entire testimony. I have learned that the presence of Jesus in daily life does not feel like the absence of pain. It feels like company within the pain. It feels like the difference between drowning and swimming in deep water. The water is equally deep either way. The difference is whether you are alone in it. I'm not alone in it. I have never been alone in it since the night I said his name in the dark. And that single, daily, renewable, inexhaustible reality is worth more than the absence of any grief I carry. Every day he provides. I want to give you specific examples because vague spiritual language is easy and specific examples cost something. They cost the vulnerability of being precise about what you received and from whom, which opens you to the skepticism of people who would rather call it coincidence. I will take that risk. 3 weeks after my arrival at the settlement, I had no food for 2 days. Not as metaphor. Literally no food. The distribution had been delayed, my emergency reserves were gone, and I had been quietly giving my last portions to a family of 7 in the adjacent shelter whose youngest child was showing signs of malnutrition. I prayed in the morning, not desperately, not with the brass sky feeling of those months in the camp, but with the particular calm of someone who has already had their most foundational question about God answered by a lion and can therefore approach the smaller questions with relative peace. I said, Jesus, I'm hungry. I know you know that. I trust you. 3 hours later, a woman I had never spoken to knocked on the frame of my shelter. She was from a church in the nearest town, 40 minutes away by motorcycle. She had driven 40 minutes on a motorcycle in the mid-morning heat carrying a bag of food because, she said, she had woken up at 5 a.m. with an overwhelming conviction that she needed to go to the settlement and find the woman who told the story about the lion and bring her something to eat. She didn't know my name. She asked around until someone pointed her to me. She sat with me while I ate and she cried the entire time, not from sadness, but from the particular emotion of someone who has just had a private conversation with God confirmed in real time. She kept saying, "He told me. He actually told me." I thought maybe I was imagining it, but he actually told me. She was not imagining it. This is one example. I could give you 40. The IRC caseworker who processed my final relocation paperwork and, at the last moment, found an additional housing supplement that had not been available the previous week. The pastor who appeared at exactly the right moment with exactly the right connection to a legal aid organization that helped me begin the documentation process I needed. The woman at the water point who turned out to be from a village 3 kilometers from mine, who knew people who knew what happened to 2 families I had given up searching for. 40 examples. Each one by itself could be called coincidence. Together they form a pattern that has a name. Providence. The daily, specific, unhurried, completely reliable provision of a God who has not forgotten where I am or what I need or whose name I called in the dark in Borno State. I have told this story now in 7 different locations across 2 countries. I told it for the first time formally, outside of individual conversations, 3 months after the lion, in a settlement common room with 43 people sitting on plastic chairs in the ground and the windowsills. I was terrified. Not of the audience. I had been through things that recalibrate your sense of what constitutes a threatening audience. I was terrified of the inadequacy of words. Of the gap between what I had experienced and what language could carry. I told it anyway. At the end, a man stood up at the back, middle-aged Hausa, the kind of face that has been weathered by decades of hard living into something almost geological, and he said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I have been angry at God for 11 years. Since my son died. I told God I was finished with him and I meant it." The room was very still. But if he sent a lion for this woman, if he went to that trouble for one refugee woman in Borno State, then maybe he has not forgotten my son either. Maybe he has not forgotten me. He sat down. 3 people next to him began to weep. I said, "He has not forgotten your son. And he has not forgotten you. He never stopped knowing your name even when you stopped saying his." That man prayed to receive Jesus before he left the room. He came to me afterward and he shook my hand, both hands formal, the handshake of a man conducting serious business, and he said, "Tell this story everywhere you go. Don't stop. People are hungrier than they look." I took his advice. I have not stopped. Now I need to speak to you directly. You specifically. Not the general audience. The person watching this right now, in whatever circumstances brought you to this particular video on this particular day. I don't believe you are here by accident. I don't say that as a performance. I say it because I have told this story enough times to know that the people who find it are almost never people who were casually browsing. They are people who are in something. People who are in the middle of their own version of a brass sky. Their own version of running barefoot through the dark with something closing in behind them. So let me speak to you directly. To my Muslim brothers and sisters. I know your hesitation. I know it from the inside, not theoretically, not academically. I know the weight of 5 daily prayers and the architecture of a faith that has been the structure of your identity since before you could read. I know the fear of what apostasy costs, not just spiritually, not just in terms of community, but in terms of self. Who are you if you are not this? What remains if you remove the foundation? I understand. I also need to tell you something that I could only learn by living it. The silence above your prayers, the brass sky I described in chapter 3, is not God's verdict on you. It is not confirmation that you are doing it wrong or that you are not devoted enough or that you need to pray harder, faster, more precisely, more frequently. It is an invitation. It is the silence of a door that has not yet been knocked on. I was Muslim. I prayed far in the pre-dawn dark for 30 years. I fasted Ramadan with genuine devotion. I recited Al-Fatiha with sincerity and longing and the real, authentic desire to know the God it was addressed to. And it was not until I said a different name, a name I had been taught was dangerous to say, that the sky opened. I'm not asking you to abandon your family. I'm not asking you to make a public declaration that will put you in danger. I'm asking you to do something much smaller and much more private than that. I'm asking you to do what I did in the dirt in Borno State. Just talk to him. Alone. Where no one can hear. Tell him what you told me, that you don't know if it's true, that you're afraid, that you have questions you haven't been able to ask anyone. Tell him you want to know. Tell him if he's real, if Isa is who he said he is, show you. He showed me with a lion. I don't know how he'll show you. But I know this with everything I am, he will answer. Because I am the way is not a suggestion. It is not a possibility among several. It is the word of a God who made a wild lion lie down next to a refugee widow in Borno State, and who considers your question worth showing up for. He considers you worth showing up for. To my atheist and agnostic friends, you are the witnesses I think about most often. Not because you need more convincing than anyone else, but because you are, in many ways, the most honest people in the room. You are the ones who refuse to believe something simply because believing it would be comfortable. You are the ones who require evidence before you move. And I respect that completely. So let me give you the evidence. Wanjiku Kamau. 21 years of field experience. 14 pages of contemporaneous documentation. I have no naturalistic explanation. Dr. Emeka Okafor. MSF field physician. Medical records showing anomalous tissue regeneration and physiologically inconsistent cortisol levels. No medical explanation. Professor Adiz Naji. 30 years of large carnivore behavioral research. Does not conform to any known pattern. And then, handwritten at the bottom, I find I am praying for the first time in 30 years. 3 professional witnesses. 3 different disciplines. 3 independent analyses of the same documented event. 3 identical conclusions. We have no explanation. I understand that unexplained does not automatically equal divine. I understand that the absence of a natural explanation is not, by itself, proof of a supernatural one. I'm not asking you to abandon your intellectual framework. I am asking you to consider the possibility, just the possibility, that the universe is larger than your current framework accounts for. That a God who can make a lion lie down next to a refugee woman might also be capable of being real in ways that peer-reviewed literature hasn't caught up with yet. And I am asking you to ask. Not to believe first and experience second. To ask first. The way a scientist asks, genuinely, openly, with the willingness to follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads somewhere unexpected. Jesus, if you're real, show me. That's the whole prayer. That's all it takes. He has a very good track record with that particular request. To my Christian brothers and sisters, especially those who have been in the faith for a long time, I love you. I say this as someone who came to Jesus late, as someone who encountered his reality from the outside and was undone by it. I love you, and I need to say something to you that I hope you will receive in the spirit it is intended. Some of you are living smaller than you were made for. I don't say this as accusation. I say it as observation and as compassion because I understand how it happens. Faith that begins in fire, in encounter, in the impossible, in the raw, disorienting reality of a God who shows up. Faith like that can, over years and decades of normal life, gradually migrate from the living room to the spare bedroom. Not abandoned. Just relocated. Put somewhere safe and quiet and not quite in the center of daily operation. And the miracles become history. Inspiration. Encouragement for hard times. But not really, not in the operational sense, not expected. Not sought. Not standing in the dirt with your hands open asked for. I am here to tell you, the book of Acts does not have a last page. The God who sent a lion to Borno State in 2023 is the same God who parted the Red Sea, who shut the mouths of lions for Daniel, who walked out of a tomb on the 3rd day and left the grave clothes folded. He did not retire between Revelation and whatever year you were born. He did not hand authority to committees and denominations and theological frameworks and quietly step back from operational involvement. He is here. He is moving. He is asking you to stop treating his miracles as memories and start treating them as promises. Get back in the dirt. Get back to the place where you are too far from your own resources and too close to the impossible. The place where the only thing left is to open your hands and say the name. That is where he meets people. That is where he has always met people. That is where he met me. And to everyone, I want to tell you something about that lion that I haven't told you yet. Something I've held back until now because it is the detail that, more than the roar, more than the 3 days, more than the bowed head at the end, more than all of it, this is the detail that makes me absolutely certain that what happened was not natural. Was not coincidence. Was not the strange behavior of a confused or habituated animal that wandered into a displacement camp. On the first night, the night I sat with my back against the tent frame reading Romans 8, the night the militia returned to the eastern fence, the night the lion walked to the perimeter and roared them away, I fell asleep sometime after 2 a.m. I slept for the first time in 2 days. And I dreamed. In the dream I was standing in a field, wide, green, the kind of lush that doesn't exist in Borno State, the kind that belongs to a country or a dimension I have never physically visited. The air was the temperature of the word enough. Not hot. Not cold. Just exactly right in a way that made me realize I had never in my life experienced exactly right before, only approximations of it. And Jesus was there. I want to be careful about how I describe this, because I am aware that I saw Jesus in a dream is a sentence that invites skepticism and I don't want to give you reasons to dismiss what I'm about to say. So let me be precise. I did not see a face I could draw. I did not see robes and sandals and a beard from a Renaissance painting. What I saw was light organized into personhood. Presence given specific location. Everything I had felt in the air since the night in the bush, the warmth, the weight, the recognition, gathered into a singular point that stood in front of me in that green field and was, without any question or ambiguity, him. He said, "You called my name." I said, "Yes." He said, "I heard you the first time. I was always going to answer. I was waiting for you to be empty enough to receive it." I thought about the 4 months of brass sky. The 170 prayers that felt like they hit the ceiling and fell back. I said, "Why did you wait so long?" He was quiet for a moment. In the dream, his silence was not like the silence of the brass sky, cold, hollow, absent. It was warm, full. The silence of someone who is not absent but is choosing their words because they love you too much to be careless with them. Then he said, "Because you were asking me to restore what you had. And what you had was not enough for what I have called you to. I had to wait until you stopped asking for the old thing before I could give you the new one." I woke up with the lion breathing 3 feet from my face. His eyes were open, looking at me. And I had the absolute, unshakable, completely irrational and completely certain conviction that he had been watching me sleep the entire time. I've thought about those words every single day since. You were asking me to restore what you had. And what you had was not enough for what I have called you to. I have thought about them on the hard mornings when the grief sits on my chest. I have thought about them in the IRC offices filling out forms and in the settlement common rooms telling the story and in the quiet moments alone when I wonder what the shape of the rest of my life is going to be. And every time I think about them, the same thing happens. The grief doesn't disappear. But it gets context. It gets placed inside something larger than itself. The burned village and the taken husband and the 6 months of brass sky and the 12 men and the night in the bush. All of it gets placed inside a story that is still being written, by a God who waited until I was empty enough to receive something new, and then sent a lion to prove he was serious. I'm not who I was. I'm not going back to who I was. And for the first time in my life, genuinely, without performance, without the specific exhaustion of pretending to feel something you don't, I am grateful for that. I am alive. I should not be. By every natural calculation available on the morning Hassan Dogo walked toward me with his machete raised. By geography, by numerical disadvantage, by the complete absence of any human resource I had left, I should be in the ground in Borno State. I'm not in the ground. I am here, talking to you. And the reason that Wanjika documented and Dr. Okafor measured and Professor Naji analyzed and Musa Goni witnessed and Imam Bello spent the rest of his life thinking about, the reason is one name. One name that I whispered into the dirt with a machete above my head and no human options left and nothing but empty hands and a dead woman's photograph against my heart. Jesus. One name. And he sent a lion. Before I finish, I want to give you something practical. Something you can do right now, in whatever room you're sitting in whatever country, in whatever language, with whatever history and whatever doubt and whatever distance you feel between yourself and the God I've been describing for the last 45 minutes. I want to give you the prayer. Not a complicated prayer. Not a liturgically precise prayer. Not a prayer that requires preparation or qualification or a sufficient level of prior belief. The same kind of prayer I prayed in the dirt, broken, honest, inadequate in every formal sense, and completely sufficient because the God it's addressed to does not grade on eloquence. If you are willing, if something in you, however small, however tentative, is reaching toward what I've been describing, I want you to say this. Out loud if you can. Whispered if you must. Silently if that's all you have. Say this. Jesus, I don't know if this is real. I don't know if you're real. But I've been watching and listening, and something in me wants what this woman has. Not the lion, not the miracle, but the thing underneath it. The thing that made her peaceful when she should have been terrified. The thing that called her daughter in the dark. I want to know if you'll call me that too. I'm not bringing anything impressive. I'm bringing what I have, which is not much. Questions. Doubts. A past I'm not entirely proud of. A future I can't see the shape of. But I'm here. And I'm asking. If you're real, if you died for me and rose again and you're actually actively, presently alive right now, then I want to know you. I'm opening my hands. I'm saying your name. Jesus, I'm yours. Whatever that means, wherever that goes, I'm yours. Show me what comes next. If you prayed that prayer, if you said those words, however haltingly, however mixed with doubt, however quietly, I need you to hear something. Heaven just responded. Not metaphorically. Not eventually. Right now. In the same way it responded to a widow in the dirt in Borno State. In the same way it responded to Musa Goni with his hands flat on a table and 23 people in a settlement common room and an imam who asked and was answered and a scientist who started praying for the first time in 30 years. The same way. Because he doesn't have a tiered response system. There is no version of that prayer that gets a lesser answer. There is no background too dark, no doubt too deep, no distance too far. Neither death nor life. Neither angels nor demons. Neither the present nor the future. Nor anything else in all creation. Nothing separates you from this. Welcome to the family. And for those of you who are already in the family, who have known Jesus for years or decades, who prayed that prayer a long time ago in a different room in a different life. Don't wait for a militia. Don't wait for 12 armed men and a machete in a refugee camp and the complete exhaustion of every human option before you open your hands and get back to the place where he does his best work. The place of empty hands. The place of the one name. You don't have to earn your way back there. You don't have to clean yourself up first, reconstruct the faith you feel you've allowed to deteriorate, produce evidence of sufficient spiritual seriousness. You just have to do what I did. Say the name. He heard you the first time. He was always going to answer. He was waiting for you to be empty enough to receive it. My name is Amara. I am a refugee widow from Borno State, Nigeria. I have one bag, one photograph, and one pocket New Testament. I have 23 names written in the back of it and more being added. I have a story that professionals cannot explain and witnesses cannot forget, and I am going to keep telling it in every settlement common room and IRC office and open-air gathering and YouTube video that will have me, because the man who shook my hand with both hands and told me people are hungrier than they look was absolutely right. You are hungrier than you look. And the God who sent a lion, the God who calls refugees daughter in the dark, the God who waited until I was empty enough to receive something new, the God whose presence makes wild animals lie down and armed men run and scientists start praying, that God is the answer to your hunger. He is not ancient history. He is not a comfort for simple people who need mythology to cope with hard lives. He is not safely contained within the covers of a book or the walls of a church or the centuries between his miracles and your mourning. He is here. He is real. He is moving. And he knows your name. Say his.